I am James Sullivan. I'm the program director for the film festival. And we have the co-directors, and producer Jon Miller with us.
Mike, John, and I were our independent filmmakers. Well, I guess I'm in Toronto now, but we sort of came up in New York in the independent film scene, and worked on each other's projects. Mike is a really talented sound person on top of being a really talented filmmaker. John is a cinematographer. So at the outset, I have to say, if you're thinking of making a documentary, it's a really good thing to partner with a sound person and a cinematographer. The quality of your filmmaking will be that much higher. And so we started working on this project in 2014, and really didn't know where it was going. We actually started with Gus. Was one of the first characters we met as we started down this journey of exploring the nexus between Cuban baseball and the migration. And we started with Gus, and we had an interview with Gus in LA that you see in the film. And at the end of that interview, Gus said something like, well, I have these 4 guys down in Costa Rica. Do you want to go meet them? And we're like, of course, yeah, let's go see where the story will take us. And we went down and we filmed some of the first act footage you see in the film, like the very first showcase where there are the 27 scouts there. And it may have been that showcase actually where we were driving back to the little hotel we were staying at, and in the backseat, Mike and I were in the backseat, and Mike turned to me and said, I think we found our story. And from there, it just took on a life of its own.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember that moment as well. And Sami, came up with this brilliant concept to, fuse our interest in sports and baseball with these deeper social issues. And as he mentioned, our gateway, into the story was Gus. But there was a moment I remember after that first showcase when we were hanging out with the guys, and it's a scene in the film after that showcase. And you felt just the brotherhood and the hopefulness and the camaraderie. And I remember Carlos looked at me and he's like, so when is this coming out? Who is this about? And we were like, I don't know, man. But after that, when we came back down, I remember, we had the conversation with those guys and we had the answer. We're like, we really want to make this about you and your journeys and wherever that took us.
I am sadly getting all this feedback back, so I'm going to keep myself on mute and ask you guys to kind of carry the conversation if that's possible. But so tell me a little more about Gus Dominguez, because I think he's a little bit of a controversial character. He had some trouble with situation about trying to bring players to the States in the past. Can you tell me about his interest in having himself appear in this film, because he ends up not looking great in the film, or at least in terms of the players. So tell me a little more about your relationship with him, and maybe how he feels about the film having been made.
Yeah, John, do you want to answer? You want me to answer it? Because this is like our first Q&A, so we're still figuring out organically how to answer these. I can start. Gus has that really complex background that we kind of only tease in the film, but he's Cuban American. He came over in the freedom flights in the 1960s, and kind of stumbled into representing Cuban baseball players. This is like legendary story which we couldn't get into in the film, where he was like a young graphic designer working at a Miami radio station, or stopping by at a Miami radio station. And he had designed a candy bar for Jose Canseco. And as it happened, Rene Arocha, who's like the first defector from the Cuban national team, was also at the same radio station. And depending on who you talk to, there are like different accounts. Like Rene either convinced Gus to represent him, or Gus convinced Rene that he was going to be his agent. but they started working together, and Rene had a successful career, a few years with the St. Louis Cardinals, made a fair amount of money, and then Gus built up this reputation as being the go-to guy for, for Cuban defectors. I think
in a sense also, like Michael Lewis said, he invented the market for Cuban baseball players. He was there at the beginning, and I think it was that trust that Rene saw. And Rene's like, I want you to represent me, even though he wasn't a baseball agent at that time. And it was that personality thing that brought him in.
And and we show in the film that even a couple years ago when our film was we were shooting it, there's this gray area, this like legal gray area where you have to operate to get Cubans out of Cuba and into the United States. And so at some point, in the eyes of the U.S. government, he crossed the line. To be honest, it was kind of bullshit. Like the fact that he was, without getting into the nitty gritty of the legal case, but he was given a raw deal. I think the U.S. Attorney's Office in South Florida kind of seized upon the fact that he was, a kind of Beverly Hills sports agent. They used him as a kind of cause célèbre to prosecute him, where there are other guys who, have since sort of faced the gavel of justice, who are doing way worse things. Here's this guy who is like staunchly anti-Castro, anti-communist Cuba, prosecuted by his own government. And I think there's something about that tragedy that really resonated with us. So at the outset, we thought we were telling a hopeful story. We thought we were telling a hopeful story about this guy, American, and these Cuban guys who were going to make it. And it looked to the three of us, and maybe we were naive too. Maybe we swallowed the Kool-Aid, but we thought it was going to happen. We thought it was really going to happen. And then over the course of, the months and years, it started to slip away. And then relationships got fractured. Gus's relationship got fractured with the players. I think he's not pleased with the film, but he's also not pleased with how things turned out with the players. There's lots of blame, being pointed from both sides, but I think we did it in a really fair job to everybody on both sides. I think what we found in sort of the extensive screening and feedback we did was that there's some people who actually identify with Gus. They understand where he's coming from. He's here to help these guys get out of Cuba, maybe sign $1 million contract, but ultimately it's a business, we were careful not to draw too much judgment on either side, but ultimately we're interested in the humanity and what these players have risked, who are essentially being commodified by the system, and hope that carries through.
Do you think that the players that, these guys are young guys, do you think that, and I'll just say, I've resolved the horrible feedback problem. And so thanks for bearing with me on that. Apologies all around. Do you think that the players know Gus's name? I mean, is he sort of like, he's the guy, like you got to find him. And, if you think you have a shot at coming to America from Cuba, you got to find Gus Dominguez because he's the guy who might be able to bring you here. Do you think that they know his name even at their young age?
That's a good question. I think Gus likes to think so. I would have to ask the guys directly, but he talks about in the film that he's like, I'm the guy that you go to. He was the agent to sign the first player for $1 million, and I think they put a lot of trust in Gus. Some of them weren't sure. I mean, Carlos talks about it. He wasn't sure about leaving Cuba, but they made it seem like it was the right choice for him, and he would be able to help his family this way. And I think that was coming from a sincere place. As Sami said, obviously Gus is a businessman, and this is his business. But I think Gus wanted to sign them as much as the players wanted to sign in some senses.
Right. We have a question from, I'm going to start taking questions from our viewers. And this one asks, why do you think Gus was unwilling to accept the $100,000 contract?
Go ahead, Sami. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that you know, we kind of have to operate in fact. You know, it's like, even this, we're not a hard-hitting piece of journalism. It's not Frontline or the evening news, but some of that stuff we just don't know. It was subject to much debate, and there also was a point where there was sort of conflicting agencies working behind the scenes, and to be honest, like, a lot of the complexity of that stuff we were never completely privy to, because we're not on the calls with the teams, or with Gus, or with Baró and his family in the US. So we didn't, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what happened, but there was a sense that time was running out, and to everybody, including I think us again as filmmakers, we didn't quite see that this window of when you could sign for $20 million to when you could basically sign for nothing had probably disappeared. So I don't know, Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, we talk a lot about you know, Gus's methods and the training and this sort of thing, and he's really coming from an old school approach to baseball. So I think the adjustment and the acceptance of the market closing maybe was difficult, but he'd invested a lot of money into these guys, and 100K isn't really gonna fulfill the promise that he made to them, that he made you know, to his investors, and be able to recoup. So you can understand from a business perspective, but also, you know, you give a guy a shot, you get him to the States, you get him training with the team, and you never know what can happen after that. But like Sami said, we weren't really privy to all of the dealings with the teams and the offers that were made. I mean, I saw a few emails, you know, when we thought that Baró was going to sign with Houston, but we never saw anything concrete. So, you know.
So I want to go back to something that Sami said a few minutes ago. You know, you thought at the beginning you were going to be making a hopeful film about three guys who looked like they seriously might have had the goods to you know, play at a high level in America. And there are obviously several clear turning points where some of the tryouts are not going particularly well, and you feel so much for these guys. You know, the pressure that they must feel, you know, trying to perform at the drop of a hat like that for all the scouts that gather. It's incredible, you know. But so what does it feel like from the filmmaker's perspective to realize that you're going from what you thought was going to be a hopeful film to something else entirely?
John, you want to take this one?
Well, it's a hard one. I think we were rooting for them to sign all the way along, and as things evolved, we were like, we're going to follow this story wherever it goes. And you know, the ups and downs, and we did not see where these things were going to go and what was going to happen. And I think we were holding out hope with the guys that all the way to the end that something would happen. And as we, in some ways, I think Sami kind of alluded to this, that there's a lot of footage and there's a lot of things that didn't make it into the movie because they're too complicated to really explain. And we also don't have all the pieces of information to explain them properly. And I think we didn't fully understand how some of all this happened until looking back, you know, 3 months, 6 months after some of these things happened, and then more things, you know, new pieces of information came out. So.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when we promoted the film, we obviously mentioned the fact that Sami, you were nominated for an Oscar for your last, your short film, St. Louis Superman, which, congratulations, that's amazing. And we showed all the Oscar-nominated shorts in February at our festival, and so you have some fans in Newburyport and you know, beyond because of that. Can either you or Michael or any of you talk a little more about the idea of what we were just discussing, which is that you never know where your subject is going to take you. You know, you go in thinking you're shooting one thing, but it's the nature of documentary film, right? I mean, people's lives change, circumstances change. Did that happen with St. Louis Superman for you, Sami, or has it happened for you, Michael, in past experience? How do you compare the idea that this story changed so drastically from the beginning to your past experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll sort of try and tee this one up for Mike, because there's a sort of moment of crystallization, I think, for him that is super dramatic. But with St. Louis Superman, I think with Bruce Franks Jr., the sort of participant in that documentary, there is this intimacy that is really exceptional, that as a documentary filmmaker, you can spend years and years striving for. Like even, Carlos is, I think, watching right now. It was always work to try and get Carlos to be comfortable with the camera. But like Bruce with St. Louis Superman, he just got it. Once we convinced him, which was not easy, he was just game. And I think similarly, Happy got that. Like he got that, honestly, years before the other guys got it. And there was a moment where we were in New York. I think we had just come back from a trip to Costa Rica, and Mike was upstate shooting an indie feature, and he was like, hey, there's Carlos.
There he is. That's awesome.
We have a special guest.
Hey,
Hello.
no.
¿Qué bolas eres?
Todo bien.
¿Todo bien?
Yeah.
This is Carlos from the film, everybody. And just to finish up quickly what Sami was saying, Bruce Franks is the state representative from Ferguson on St. Louis Superman, right? So Carlos, you're in Florida.
Yes. Sí. Yeah.
How long have you been there?
Maybe 5 years and a half.
Wow, already 5 years. It's a long process.
Yeah.
How is your English?
I'm little. It's not full English.
Pero está mejorando, hermano.
Yeah, bro. It's 5 years here.
Oh, man.
I like English.
Yeah, dude. It's crazy to me.
Carlos, have you had the opportunity to watch the film previous, or is this the first time you've seen it in full?
I don't understand.
¿Es fue la primera vez que tú viste la película o no?
Sí, la primera vez.
Yeah, the first time.
Wow. Okay, and you have family members with you?
¿Tiene su familia contigo?
Aquí solo mi esposa, mi bebé que tiene un mes de nacido, y con la mamá de mi esposa, más los niños. Y mi papá y mi mamá están en Cuba. Y mi hermana pero vivimos en casa diferente.
So he's with his wife, and he's got a brand new baby, and his mother-in-law. His sister is in Miami as well, but his parents are in Cuba.
Who is Yanara?
My
wife,
sister. My sister. Yeah.
So your sister wants to know why you didn't get signed. She sent it. She posed a question.
Yeah, I know. It's too much the question.
You haven't answered that for her yet?
What? Mike,
¿No tiene respuesta para tu hermana? ¿Por qué no firma?
I don't know. Es como, eso pasó hace mucho tiempo atrás. Y es que no, es como decir que yo no sabía tampoco lo que pasó en ese momento. Todos pensábamos que lo que estábamos allí íbamos a lograr firmar, y de repente todo quedó en nada, ¿me entiendes?
So he said a lot has happened, but he doesn't even know to this day why he didn't sign, but he always gave it everything he could, and he has no regrets. Yeah.
Carlos, how is life for you in Florida? What are you doing for work? And are you still playing any baseball?
Dime, Mike.
¿Cómo está la vida en Florida? Y ¿Y en qué está trabajando? ¿Y está practicando el béisbol todavía o no?
No, cuando llegué al principio me pasé unos meses entrenando, pero no tuve la coordinación para volver a seguir jugando. Entonces me dediqué a trabajar y trabajo como instalador de puertas y ventanas en la construcción, relativamente como se llama.
So when Carlos first got to Miami, he trained for a few months, but he didn't have the same connections, in order to move his game forward. So he quickly knew that he had to work, and he's been working in construction.
No independent league or prior to the, obviously the virus, he wasn't playing independent league or anything like that last couple of years.
No, no está jugando otra liga independiente.
No, es como tratado de buscar alguna conexión porque todavía lo llevo en la sangre, pero es que se me hace muy difícil al no tener la posibilidad de entrenar y trabajar a la vez, porque si no trabaja, sabe que la cuestión del dinero. Entonces no he tenido la oportunidad quisiera lograrlo, de jugar otra liga, o sea, en México, en Dominicana, Puerto Rico, y no lo he logrado.
Yeah, he didn't really have the opportunity to play in those other leagues because he had to work and make money, and you can't train if you're broke. So
Sure, right. John and Sami, when was the last time you talked to Carlos? Have you seen? Is this the first time you've seen him and talked to him in a while?
No, I talked to him this morning.
No, no es la primera vez.
Yeah, I haven't talked to Carlos in a long time. We texted a bit, but like, we haven't
I
seen
know.
each other in a long time.
Me
Good to see you,
equivoqué.
man.
Yeah.
So how much do you guys feel, you've spent years now following these three guys' stories. How much do you feel kind of indebted to them, or like that you each as the filmmakers want to keep tabs on them and make sure that they're doing okay and that, life is moving along for them?
I mean, big time. I think, they've been so generous to us by sharing their lives, with such open hearts, that I think we're forever indebted to them. And I think we felt just a tremendous responsibility in order to bring their honest story to the world. Sorry, what was the question again? I lost my train.
Mike, sorry, explícale que yo le dije que yo no la había visto antes, porque como ustedes siempre me decían que era entre nosotros, hasta que no saliera, yo le dije a él que tampoco la había visto, pero sí la había visto, lo del documental. Hazle saber a él.
Otra vez, que eso es, no es la primera vez.
Él me preguntó que si yo había visto el documental.
Sí, yo entendí. Carlos just
explícale a él que eso quedó como que era privado entre nosotros, y entonces yo le dije a él que no.
Yeah. Carlos just wanted to clarify that he did see, like, we shared some of the documentary with him previously, but he was just respecting that privacy.
Yeah, I know.
So,
for real. 100%.
Sorry again, what was the other question?
Well, I'm actually going to move to a couple of viewer questions because we've got some good ones. Sharon, a viewer named Sharon, wants to know about if one of you can speak to the special immigration status. I think it was called what's called Wetfoot, right?
Wetfoot, Dryfoot.
I think that some viewers are going to see that and maybe think for the first time that it's the first time they're becoming aware of that policy and the fact that it ended. So that was in 2017. Does anybody want to talk? I guess it ended right at the end of the Obama, right when the new president took office, right?
Correct. Right. Yeah, it was. It was probably part of the negotiations. I don't know if the full account of the Obama-Castro negotiations have been published yet, but there was an understanding or a rumor among regular Cubans that special status that they had been afforded since the 1990s. Since, if you're old enough to remember the kind of crisis with, around the time of Jon Gonzales and people coming over on rafts. So there was like this effort to try and solve the problem of, that humanitarian crisis. But, one of the last acts of the Obama administration was ending that policy, which, you know, it makes sense. If people are applying for asylum and they're refugees from other countries, they should be treated equally, you know, and there shouldn't be a special status for Cubans or, you know, Congolese. But, you know, to their credit, the Cuban people had the sense that things were going to end, and, you know, Carlos and Happy and tens of thousands of other Cubans realized that, and this was maybe their last opportunity to get into the United States. And unfortunately for Victor, that meant that he was, you know, he's stuck in the Dominican Republic. And, you know, to go back to your earlier question, I think for the three of us, I think that's maybe the hardest and part is that, you know, Victor is not doing as well as Carlos and Happy, and, you know, that responsibility we feel, not as filmmakers, not as like journalists, but as people to somebody who's hurting, is something that we talk about every day. So that's the crazy thing, that, you know, politics and history are huge concepts, but what it comes down to is just people. And, you know, what's the cost when you get caught in between these huge forces? And that's sort of what drew us to the project, and, you know, still moves us to this day.
How is it difficult to stay in touch with Victor? Or have you been able to?
We stay in pretty regular touch. I mean, you know, the reality of the world is that, you know, cell phone communication is less expensive than food and housing in a lot of places. So, yeah, he's down here in Dominican Republic. Last time I was here, I caught up with him. I went with some of my good friends to see where he was, and you know, try to see what was going on and lift his spirits a little bit and see what we can do. But like Sami said, it's like, it's beyond a responsibility as a filmmaker. It's just, these are our friends, our brothers, and just human beings. And we all, especially in this time, maybe it's easier for us to put a face to some of the strife and suffering that our brothers and sisters endure. But this is it, you know, we're one human being together. So. But yeah, we stay in touch with Victor and Carlos and Happy, and I was just talking with Rainier just before getting on, Happy's brother. So we're glad that we can stay in such close contact.
We have another question from a viewer named Helene, who wants to know, and I'm sure lots of folks who have watched or are going to watch this film would like to know the same thing. How in the world did you shoot some of that intense footage of Happy trying to make his way here, you know, that whole immigration nightmare that he went through? Which one of you was actually with him, or who had the camera in their hand? And how did that come about?
Well, I mean, getting back to some of the earlier questions, I mean, we started sort of framing the story through Gus, and we thought it would be a redemption story of his. And as we got closer to the other guys, we knew that this was bigger than just a story through Gus's perspective. And we really stuck with Carlos and Happy and Victor and some of the other players. But there was a moment, we had all been waiting, and the guys had been waiting to sign, and, you know, we had made several trips down, and it was the whole waiting game. But we had a sense that there was some changes, and the first thing that happened was, you know, Happy got released. So I was up, I had started a sound mixing job. I was on the first day of a feature upstate New York, and I think we were spread across the country. John were you in California or something? But we sort of mobilized on the phone, and we're like, I was texting with Happy. He's like, listen, they cut me. I'm going to head to the States. I was like, when? He's like, tomorrow. I was like, oh God. Because his cousins, Lorenzo and his wife, Marianas, and their baby, he knew were coming up. They made the same trail that Happy and Carlos did through Ecuador and Colombia and Panama. And Happy wanted to travel with them because it's dangerous. So we knew that we had to follow Happy, and we just sort of mobilized, and it would just happen to be me who was able to sort of release myself from that job. I found a replacement, and then Sami met me at the airport with a ticket, and Jon had prepared the camera, and I knew that they had my back, but we knew it was important to stick with Happy and see where it took us.
We have another question from a viewer named Lenny who wants to know about the extent to
Yeah.
which you.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because I mean, the practicality of it too is like, you know, Mike was in it, so maybe it's hard for him to assess it. But like, so he had this 5D camera, and I think also had developed this rapport with Happy over at that point. I guess like 5 or 6 months, and that familiarity, you know, you dream about in a documentary subject. I mean, that stuff is not replicated. You can't just go to the street and just find a random person and shoot that. But Mike had like developed this relationship with Happy, so he could capture those moments, like even talking about the bribe on the way to Costa Rica, you know, just like that sort of banality of talking about that, which in retrospect is so important to the finished film. But the presence of mind to film that, to have it look good, again, like partner with sound and camera people if you're making a documentary. But then of course, then there's the epic crossing of the border. You know, when they were detained, Mike was detained too in the Tapachula immigration facility. And, you know, I don't know if it was God above or, you know, some other divine universal, you know, force over us, but suffering through that imprisonment, the camera was sit in a separate room that the authorities had. All this incredible footage, which, you know, dramatizes, humanizes the plight of a migrant, was just sitting there. And, you know, and Mike can just talk about that moment of like finally being released. I remember, I mean, I was safe in Inwood in New York, but he was like detained. I remember a call where for days he was like, he was fine, he was Mike. And then one day he was just broken. You know, I can still remember the pain in his voice. So it was not an easy process. Carlos went through the same journey. But then that moment of release and just like looking for the footage, I can't imagine that. And Mike went and like checked the camera, and it's like, sure enough, they hadn't deleted, the Mexican authorities hadn't deleted it. And
Right, I was going to ask, I mean, you probably figured, what if I don't get the camera back, right?
Well, I wasn't concerned with the camera and more the footage, but just to kind of backtrack a little bit, you know, when Happy reached out to me and said he was cut and just had this instinct that I had to go, or one of us had to go. When we were there and when we were traveling, yes, I was filming him as covertly as I could, you know, with the 5D camera and a little Zoom recorder. But we were both on a journey together, and with Chele, his friend, you know, for part of the journey. So we were traveling, we were surviving together, we were making it, we were watching each other's back. In terms of the filming, there was a point, you know, there's a couple scenes on the bus where we're traveling with a group of 40 or 50 Cubans. And there was a point when we were waiting to get on this bus in Honduras, and I kind of made my way into the bus, and Happy paid the bus driver. He's like, yeah, there's going to be a white guy with a green hat. He's going to get on. And I was kind of laying low for a little bit until all of these Cubans I had traveled with realized that I was there documenting their journey, and they embraced me, you know, and I felt this sense of brotherhood and family that I think shows in the film, and that, you know, began with Happy and Carlos and Victor, and by extension, you know, these other folks we were traveling with. And to fast forward, you know, when I was facing the choice of you know, continuing to follow Happy or thinking about myself or this and that. I mean, we were traveling with Happy's cousin and a 3-month-old baby. So, you know, in terms of personal safety, you know, I'm part of the group and, you know, I'm here to look out for the group and we're in this together. But it was a risk in terms of the footage. I was able to send a hard drive back to the States in Nicaragua, but, you know, through a few countries, was not carrying a computer. I was just, you know, saving the cards and burying them in my backpack. So, you know, deciding to cross the river with Happy and then, you know, sort of surrendering myself to the authorities, I was risking the footage that I'd shot, you know? So it was a risk. And like Sami said, I don't know if it was divine intervention or just the energy and the spirit of everybody involved in the project. You know, it wasn't just me in that moment, you know, it was all of us. So,
Right.
That's where we are.
This might be a good opportunity to bring Carlos back into the conversation. You guys talked earlier about how, you know, it's kind of a 1 in a million situation to find a guy like Happy who is so photogenic and so camera friendly. You know, he got it right, or he just sort of was born with that sense. He knows that the camera's on him and he knows how to play to it. Can Carlos tell us a little more about what it felt like to be another subject of you guys? Like how was it uncomfortable? Did it put added pressure on him? Did he sort of get to a point where he felt, okay, these guys have been around now, I'm a little more comfortable with the camera on me?
Carlos,
Yeah.
¿puede hablar cómo sentí cuando estábamos grabando en el principio? Cuando era su sentimiento a grabar, tenía, tímido, estaba tímido o con cuánto tiempo hace para tú acostumbrarse a grabar?
No, desde el principio no hay mucha costumbre, pero sí ya se fue acostumbrando después de la primera semana. Cuando empezamos al principio uno se siente tímido, pero todo lo que se grabó ha sido verdad. Cada filmación que ustedes hicieron fue real. Ahí no es nada, ahí todo es real. Día a día, minuto a minuto, segundo a segundo, todo fue real. Eso es lo que pasó en tantos años cuando estuvimos en Costa Rica, desde el principio hasta el final.
Carlos said that he wasn't used to it in the beginning, but after a week or so, he started to become more comfortable, which I have a follow-up question to him about that because I don't know about that. But one thing that he really wanted to, you know, convey is that everything that we filmed from his perspective, from the beginning to the end, everything in Costa Rica was the truth, 100% the truth. So, and as filmmakers, you know, that's important to us, you know, especially that the subjects and these young men and women that we're filming, you know, they see the truth in the footage and in their story being told. But can I ask Carlos a follow-up, because it did take a little bit of time in order for him to become more comfortable, I think. And, you know, Carlito, yo recuerdo que hace muchas veces antes tú estabas cómodo para hablarme con la verdad en tu corazón. Recuerda eso, porque hace tiempo, ¿sí o no?
Cuando todo fue sucediendo, al principio no quería sentirme mal al no haber filmado. Pero ya cuando me di cuenta que no lo lograría en ese momento, entonces decidí hablar la verdad.
He said, like, in the beginning, he didn't want to feel bad or reveal like any sort of negative emotions, but as the course went on, you know, he wanted to convey the truth, you know, even if it was through his tears. So
right. So I'll ask a couple of more quick questions. I think they're both going to come from viewers, and they seem like nice places to maybe get ready to wrap up. We have a question from a viewer named Gail, who says that she was lucky enough to go to Havana to play softball in 2016. And she's just wondering if Carlos can talk a little bit about the passion for the game in Cuba. We hear a lot about American kids maybe losing some interest in baseball, or that the numbers are down, kids playing, but that's clearly not the case in Cuba. So, Michael, thank you. I'll thank you now for your fantastic translation.
I'm doing my best.
But if you can ask Carlos that'd be great.
You don't want to hear my early interviews in this project. So, Carlos, ¿puede hablar cómo significa el béisbol en Cuba? Recuerda que tú y muchos de otros peloteros dicen que es en la sangre de los cubanos. ¿Puede hablar un poquito más de la significación del béisbol del público?
Desde el punto de vista mío, yo creo que cuando decimos que el béisbol se lleva en la sangre, es que se juega cada momento con decisión, con cómo dar lo mejor de sí en cada momento, en cada situación de la situación de que se te dé el momento del juego del béisbol. Se lleva a darlo todo de sí, a como dejar la vida en el terreno.
If I understood correctly, I mean, Carlos just talked about how baseball is just intertwined into every part of life. You know, when you're a kid, you're kind of born with a glove in your hand in that sense. And, you know, we experienced it ourselves as just the community aspect of baseball on a grand scale, and even on just the smallest levels in the street corners and the small little cities.
Con respecto a mí, llevo desde los 8 años jugando hasta que terminé en Costa Rica, que no logré firmar. Más o menos un promedio de 15 years.
You played 15 years.
More, yeah, or more.
¿Quiere hablar de su experiencia jugando en Cuba con su equipo?
Es que hace mucho tiempo, créeme, no, ¿cómo decirte? Es algo que nunca se olvida. Desde pequeño siempre pasé por todas las etapas del béisbol en Cuba, que se llama la EI, de la EPA, la academia, y logré llegar al equipo nacional de Holguín. Entonces, como te digo, toda la vida ha sido el béisbol, y actualmente quisiera jugarlo otra vez.
Baseball's life in Cuba.
Yeah.
He spoke a little bit about, you know, growing up playing and working hard to play for Holguín province. It's been a little while for him, you know, thinking back on the memories, but it's just so interweaved into life there.
Right. So last question, I was going to ask this a few minutes ago. So this is from a viewer named Lenny. And Lenny wants to know, this is for the filmmakers, all three of you, if you can all answer, maybe we'll wrap up on this. But Lenny wants to know, what was the extent of each of your baseball fandom before making the film? And how has making the film changed that relationship to the game for you?
That's a great question. I love that question. I mean, that's where the project started, to be honest. And I shout out to my wife, who's like in the other room, being very
watching the baby, right?
watching a 2-month-old baby. But it actually started with her, because I was killing myself on another project, and what I do to relax was I'd come home and I'd look at baseball statistics. And we're not talking like home runs and RBIs. We're talking like the real nerd stuff.
Right.
Line drive rate, spin rate, like just spreadsheets, the most boring thing you ever seen in your life. But it just something calm about it. And you know, I'm the son of immigrants. I grew up in a small town in Ontario, and for me, baseball was a way of sort of being a part of you know, the culture, of being part of something larger than myself. And you know, I think for the three of us, as we sort of got older, as we you know, became men or tried to become men, we took a critical lens to the sports that we loved, And I think especially now at this moment, in the pandemic, 6 months, whatever it is into the pandemic, like as we think about how insulated we are, I wonder if that's what's going on now with like the struggle for just people to wear, a fucking mask. Like wear a mask. I mean, are you so insulated from the horrors of what's happening that you can't wear a mask? And the same thing goes for sports. There are hundreds and thousands of players who take considerable risk for baseball, for soccer, for American football, and we never see the cost on them. The collegiate athletes who fail out, who get their scholarship taken away because they get injury. So I think we need to have like a kind of reckoning and move beyond convenient narratives and conspiracy theories that give us comfort but don't help us process the world. So I think for the three of us, that was really an important drive. It's like, what is the hidden story? Even that moment that Mike described where Happy was cut, the film project could have been over, but Mike stepped up, and said, I'm going to follow the story wherever it takes me. And that's really been the guiding light for us. It's like to show the cost, to show what Carlos risked, to visit his family. Still to this day, it gives me chills. And I hope we can go back to Mayari to see his parents go with him together. But we're people. This is not a movie. There are people dying for COVID. There are people dying for these sports, and people need to wake up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And to go back to your comment about the masks, we're watching the ball players, the professional ball players right now. They're scrimmaging, getting ready for the season to start this week. Some of them are wearing masks, right? Like they're actually Didi Gregorio, I think, just hit a homer off of Scherzer or one of the good pitchers, with a mask on. So at least there's a little bit of leadership there. Maybe that's the last thing that I'll end on. Anybody got any predictions for how this crazy looking truncated season is going to go? Do any of you care to comment on what is it going to go for a week and shut down? Is it going to be some, what are we going to see from the major leagues this year?
I'm not sure what we're going to see exactly, and these conversations that are being had around sports are important, and I think hopefully we've finally gotten over this idea that other social discussions don't belong in sports and this other nonsense, because like Sami said, we're people. This is a human story, and for me the connection with baseball and sort of the nostalgia around it definitely comes from my childhood and upbringing and connection with my friends and family in Wisconsin. And my dad grew up in New York playing stickball in Brooklyn, and it's something that we connect on. And to see that family connection between Carlos and his dad and Victor and his father, who's a coach, and Happy's dad is actually here in Dominican Republic right now coaching. So there's humanity behind these stories, and that's, I think, where a lot of people's love for sports begins. It's teamwork, it's community, but the sports that we enjoy on these grand scales, we take them for granted, and like Sami's saying, it's time to lift the veil and realize the human cost that's behind these sports and these other forms of entertainment that we enjoy, and ask ourselves like how our participation affects that. So, and they're difficult decisions because we love these sports, but at what cost, and how can they evolve in a way that is beyond just a game, because I think to most people it isn't just a game. This is life.
Well, I think sorry, James. The directors and the participants of the doc always get to talk, or like the producer always gets shortchanged. So one thing I should just say before we end is like Jon. One of the reasons why Jon, and Mike and I started working on the project was because Jon's been making films in Cuba for more than a decade. And one thing that he can speak to is like the change in Cuba and Cuban baseball. So I just like to throw to him to make sure he has a chance to say something, if that's cool.
Sure, that's cool, Sami. Yeah, I came onto this project because I was a huge fan of Cuba and kind of obsessed with the uniqueness of Cuba and Cubans and the way that baseball in Cuba is magical. It's nothing like, I mean, it's like baseball in the United States, but it feels so much more sort of essential and magical and old. But on the other hand, like those leagues are kind of dying away. And I was thinking about, like, in terms of your question about the prediction, like sports in the United States, like because of the TV deals, what, you know, the NBA is finding a way, baseball is finding a way, the US Open is going to go on without, you know, any spectators. I think all these leagues are going to find some way through it, but hopefully there's some kind of like, what is essential about these sports, and that I think we're all going to come out of this changed. And, you know, hopefully Major League Baseball is going to, you know, for things like this movie is going to change a little bit, and the ways that, you know, that we watch sports and consume sports will be changed by this experience, you know, because there's this weird opening at this moment.
Well, you guys have done a fantastic job of illuminating just how much sports mean to us, but also how much they mean to us as people, as you guys said, so much more eloquently than I'm going to, or than I will. But you know, and you couldn't have known 4 or 5 years ago the extent to which immigration, or maybe you could, but you know, maybe not the extent to which immigration would be such a hot button issue now, when your film is coming out. So we are thrilled to have helped some more folks see it. Thank you so much thank you so much to Carlos for being our surprise guest.
Thank you.
And to Happy and Victor for letting you guys tell their stories. Thanks to Jon Miller for joining us, producer. Thanks to Michael Gassert for being our expert translator, and Sami Khan's co-director.
Thank you,
We really
Jim.
appreciate it, guys. So sorry about the snafu at the beginning, but we got through it, and that you guys helped carry me through it. And other than that, we were, you know, really thrilled to show the film. So best of luck moving forward with it.
No, thank you, James. Thank you to the team at Newburyport Doc Fest too for putting this together. It's great, you know, even during this time of crisis, to have opportunities like this just connect. And you know, it's not as good as doing it in person, but it's pretty good. So thank you, James.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much, James. This was awesome.
All right,
Yeah,
guys.
super
we
grateful.
look forward to
Thanks.
seeing what you got next, and we look forward to hearing more about this film. Maybe we'll see it on, you know, maybe people will be able to stream it, you know, through one of the big, you know, one of the big places, you know, in the fall or whatever. And in the meantime, enjoy the baseball season, what little there is coming of it. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.